Kuro everyone, it is I, the Moon, and I'm here to ask you all, do you like shipping? Because I certainly do. Or at least I enjoy a lot of concepts about shipping. In truth, a lot of shipping I do isn't out of this grand desire to feel comfort in two people kissing, but it's more from the perspective of relationships in writing. A lot of stories have relationships between characters, and these can either strengthen a story, drag it down, or just add nothing to it. This can often boil down to the writing itself and how this relationship affects two characters. I don't think there's one perfect way to write a relationship because people are complicated and what they like and want out of a partner is always going to be different from person to person. But there are a lot of bad ways to write relationships, stretching from miscommunication, lack of anything interesting, or just classic sex equals romance when those two are very different things. And as someone who only really feels the concept of romance, I have a lot of views and thoughts around this topic, and as someone who's ventured into many fandom spaces, I think we all know the tragedy that is shipping. Whether that be going to war or watching the media collapse in of itself without us having to do anything. And I thought, what better way to convey my thoughts than for a good old ranking chart. Specifically about Ben 10 because it is a goldmine of ships, and what else was I going to talk about? Now, this video is going to be sort of half memeing it and half actually discussing this topic, but it's all out of fun at the end of the day. This is all my opinion, so it really shouldn't matter to you that much. If you disagree with anything I said here today, fair enough, this is the nature of shipping. What you like is what you like, and as long as it's not hurting anyone at the end of the day, then keep doing what you like. It's out of respect in the end. Today, I have compiled a list of Ben 10 ships I have seen floating around in the void. Some are very well known ships, and some I have seen but just aren't talked about that much. Good mix of rarity. If you notice a ship missing from here, it's mostly either because the subject matter of it I was not comfortable talking about, for obvious reasons, or I had nothing to say, or had too many mean things to say and didn't want to drag out the video. But if you do have a ship that isn't either of these problems, feel free to talk about it in the comments down below, and I can give my thoughts there. But as for the ranking system, I decided to go for something that isn't your usual letters to rank with, so let me explain what each of these spots mean. OTP is basically just my personal preference. This is where I'm going to be biased and put a ship that just hits right for me, even if it may not be good. I can admit when my taste is trash, but it's for me at the end of the day. Often these are ships that I can do a lot with and find joy in them being together, and I'll give more personal reasons as to why when I get to each of them. Make 'em Kiss is for ships that I genuinely enjoy, but they don't reach the same highs as OTP. But I still love their story potential, seeing them together on screen or in fan art, and can still mean a lot to me. Basically ships you will always like seeing when browsing through Tumblr, but you may not always be actively seeking it out. It's cute is the simple way of saying, yeah, I'd ship it. When you're casually watching an episode. You can see the appeal of it and like a lot about it, but it's not something that makes you want to scream or read fanfictions until 3 in the morning. You enjoy your time with it, find interest here and there, but it's just a simple ship you live with. A sweet treat every now and again. Fanfiction.net. I think I really need to explain this one. But do you ever see that ship that, while not something you want to see happen in the show, but would want to see a what-if story just because there's a lot of untapped potential there? That's what this is. These are ships that you don't necessarily want to see these people kiss, hold hands and get married, but more you could see some interesting story concepts to be made, and that is what you're more interested in. Stories you'll read, but don't care if it'll never be real, or may never want it to be real. Either way is basically the most neutral of parties here. These are ships that I can see why people enjoy them, but I don't have a strong urge to ship them myself. The kind of thing where people could sway my views on it with enough time and thought, and maybe I could see some fantastic drawings of the pair online, but overall I'm pretty meh on it. Not for me is when I start to not really like a ship, but I'll be polite about it and acknowledge aspects of it, and it may just not be my cup of tea. Maybe there's a few negative things to it that make it not work for me, but it'll most likely not be enough for me to see it as a awful concept. Nope, is basically how it sounds. I don't like it, and it just does not work. Too much is against it, and I don't like to see it for one reason or another. They're not the end of the world kind of deals, but there are aspects about it that make me uncomfortable. But with those explanations out of the way, I hope it is enough to convey what kind of points I'll be making during this video. So, why don't we get into our first couple? I figured it would be best to start off easy here, so we've got Kevin and Gwen up first. Now, this ship is really funny with hindsight because you really have to think about it. We are so used to the idea of these two being a couple that we completely forget that they barely had anything to do with each other in the original series, beyond a few interactions, and even then it was mostly about Ben and Kevin, with Gwen being caught up in that. I have to imagine that there were shippers for these two back then, so you have to imagine how nuts those people went upon seeing it actually becoming a thing in Alien Force. It really makes me wonder what happened behind the scenes for this couple to be pitched. Now, don't get me wrong, these two had a rough start of things. As funny as them suddenly being in a relationship knowing the original series, that doesn't mean I can't look past the flaws of how we got here, because so much of it was rushed and paced awkwardly. If this started off as just a physical attraction, I could see it. Pretty red-haired and tall bad boy and they're teenagers, so you know how that goes. But it was very clear that there was a romantic feeling very early on, which seems oddly placed, given at the time, the last we saw Kevin, he was trying to kill these two. So to go from that to this, it can be jarring to see. Thankfully, despite the rough start to things, I feel they were a couple that worked as more time went on and they developed their dynamic and their character traits. Even with how the series writes and drops couples like Bugs and a Bug Zapper, it's nice to see a pair stick out for the rest of the series. And you can see why it works. Gwen and Kevin have this sort of yin-yang relationship going on. She's smart, clean, respectful, with mental-based powers. Kevin is rough around the edges, charismatic, rude, and has a physical-based power. Everything about them allows them to bounce off of each other, with Gwen helping Kevin as he changes to be a better person, and Kevin adding some fun to Gwen's otherwise balanced life. Not to mention the classic trope of enemies to lovers, which I am sure the community didn't set itself fire over on fanfiction.net the moment this couple dropped. What works about Gwen and Kevin is that you do feel like they work as a team and respect each other, even if they have their offhand moments. You believe this relationship can work and you see how much they mean to each other. It's not perfect, no. You do get issues, such as Gwen trying a little too hard to change many aspects about Kevin, and times where Kevin makes comments that remind you this is most certainly his first proper relationship that lasted more than a month. But I do find myself enjoying the negative moments too, because when written well, it adds fuel to the story of writing with these two, and doesn't leave the relationship to feel boring. I really can't imagine the series without this relationship. Not to mention the fact that all of the Ben third-wheeling jokes will never cease to amuse me. Up next is the other half of the main crew. Ben and Rook is really funny to me because Omniverse is the series that tried so hard with dealing with Ben's love life, and it ended up making Ben and Rook look like the better endgame couple in the end, despite not being canon. But for as much as people meme this relationship, it's not hard to see why people ship it, including myself. Ben and Rook have arcs to the relationship, which is more than you can say for most of Ben's romantic life. You see them start off as standoffish, before growing into becoming something better, and thus bettering themselves by being around each other. Ben learning to open up more to a new partner, and Rook learning to not be so by the books. And even after that, you still get more growth between them. The series didn't just stick to the same thing once they became proper friends, so what I'm basically saying is this dynamic has some actual meat on the bones. There is a lot of good stuff here, so a lot of the fandom has latched onto that, due to how much we have been struggling out here. Though, that being said, I'm also perfectly fine with these two being just friends, as I feel like Ben gets a lot more out of a proper friendship than a relationship. It's the kind of relationship I prefer sticking to in AUs or fan art than seeing them in the actual show, and can appreciate what their friendship means for them. Their dynamic in Omniverse is one of the best things about the series, and I'm glad we could have these two rats be on screen with each other, even if it is just a friendship. But that doesn't mean I can't find value in a romance concept between them, because I think it can be very sweet. Though, when I think about it, I feel like the idea of the ship is more for Ben's sake than Rook's sake. With how much of a train wreck Ben is, perhaps the idea of shipping these two is basically like trying to place a band-aid on Ben's character arc in hopes he stops setting fire to everything around him. Next up, we've got the first of Max's love life situations, Vona and Max. And this is going to be an interesting ranking for me. So the thing about Max and Vona is that I really do like these two as a couple, but having that be in the past. Them getting together makes sense. Max is clearly into things beyond Earth, and Vona is attracted to the adventurous spirit of Max. They both had a wild side in their youth, and they were both ready to commit to each other after their first adventure together, and it's really cute. However, I feel that version of their old selves is why they can't be a thing for the rest of their lives. With Max being human, it's clear he ages very differently to Vona, and thus he matured in much different ways to her. He got older, and while he still has a good kick in him, that fire isn't what it used to be. He's settling down and connecting with his grandkids. Vona, on the other hand, has made it very clear that it is in her nature to venture out and be a free spirit, even if she loves Max and her family. A lot of context clues that we get is that this is a natural thing for Anodites, or at least I get the vibe that commitment, especially with a different species, is very hard for them to live with forever. And I feel you can make a really good story about two people who, while still in love with each other, can't spend the rest of their lives together for their own reasons. This isn't to say that they have to be on bad terms, as Max strikes me as the kind of person who would perfectly understand Vona's worldview, and the two still have great respect for each other. It really makes me wish we got an episode of them together that wasn't a flashback. That is most likely why I'm not ranking this higher as well. As cute as they are as a couple, we actually don't get a lot of them, and don't see them on screen together beyond the flashback episode. We don't even see Vona pop in when learning Max is alive. For all we know, she might think he's still dead and no one told her. But even if we got an episode of them in the current time, I suspect my feelings would still be the same. I like them being a couple in the past, but for story purposes, I feel like it makes sense as to why they wouldn't be a thing anymore. And it's nice to have a relationship between characters that are complicated, different to a normal couple. It adds to the stories, especially tales about growing older, and being in love with someone so different to you mentally and physically. But when it comes to Max's other love story, I am sure some of you saw this coming, but I won't lie. I really like the idea of Max and Zylene becoming a thing post Vona and Max. Given we saw Max and Zylene flirting like there was no tomorrow in her debut episode, I always felt like that was a sign that Vona and Max were no longer a thing, and I was cool with that. People change, and there's nothing wrong with falling in love with another person. It's a good story to show about life and how sometimes things may not be set in stone, but that's okay. Plus, I feel like Zylene and Max actually have a better long-term chemistry. Vona and Max worked when they were young because they both felt like they were on top of the world, running around without a care. Their excitement led to their relationship, while Max and Zylene work better as a long-term thing as they have similar hobbies and personality traits. Both are hard workers, seeking opportunities to grow and learn, and lived a similar lifestyle when working out in the space life. While Vona saw all of Max's out there traits, it's clear that Zylene sees all of Max's quiet traits, especially now that he's older, and there's something really sweet about that. It still kills me that Zylene got no other episodes beyond her debut, despite being connected to the plot about the Omnitrix. And for years as the series went on, I always hoped she would return, but alas, it never happened, and she has been thrown into the bin of important characters. Vona and Max might have been the couple that started this man's taste in women, but I always feel like Zylene and Max is where it should finally settle and rest. After all, Max deserves the best and Zylene deserves more screen time. But it looks like we're back to Ben's love life, which honestly will probably be half of this video, so let's get into the first of his official romantic subplots I have on the list, that being Luma Redwin and Ben. This couple is an interesting dynamic to me because a lot of it was clearly written as a joke, but there is a lot of fun to be had with this as a potential romance for Ben. After all, the start of it is basically your classic accidental engagement trope, which I know many people eat up. However, there is more to it under the surface level that you'll find when analysing these two as characters and how they bounce off of each other. Luma is strong-headed, powerful, loud, and a bit of an entitled princess, but we see that she has a lot of sense of honor to her and is good at heart. Being a Tetraman, the species culture revolves around fighting, but not in a hateful way, so when Ben beats her in a fight, she seems genuinely excited to be with him. While Catfight smeared this idea a bit sadly, I liked the initial idea that Luma didn't care too much about Ben's Tetraman form, and was more attracted to him being a hero and a skilled fighter. While he did beat her with 4 arms, she never seemed to take issue with Ben using his other aliens, just wanting a good fight out of it. I imagine she saw it as Ben using an axe in battle, wanting to see how well he could manage his skills against her. And while she was very stubborn during Rules of Engagement, you kinda have to admire her confidence and look of joy as she's planning her wedding. This is a girl that you can tell absolutely would love to have a partner she can both hold hands with and suplex into a rock as her form of a date. She knows what she likes and isn't afraid to say so. Which I think is the sad part about Catfight as an episode. I know the final message of that episode is about how her and Atea don't need husbands to rule, which fair enough. They are both capable leaders on their own. But I think the episode has the unintentional message of saying that they can't be strong with a partner. Because while they don't need one, that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong to want one eventually. This is the double-edged sword situation I have seen before in stories that try and empower women and young girls. That a strong female character should reject all ideas of getting a boyfriend because they don't need one to be strong. Which is true, in that you can be your best self without a romantic relationship, but that doesn't mean you're weak for having one if you do end up with a partner. Atea not wanting a proper husband is something I can see, since her views on romance are shallow from what you see of her, but Luma, it doesn't work. She seems to really like the idea of having a partner and eventually a wedding, and while I'm sure you could write that off as just her culture reflecting on her, I never saw it that way. So her and Ben being a thing? I could see it. While Ben is off-put by her out-there personality, I could see the pair making a good couple, as Ben could have fun with a girl that can spar with him and appreciate who he is as a hero. Honestly, I feel like Ben would just fit in a lot with Tetraman culture. They're definitely a couple I could see happening, even if not in the prime timeline. I could see them working out in an alternate Ben's world, and I would love to see it. But now, for this couple. Luma and Atea. And this is going to be an interesting one for me to explain. Right. So, I'm pretty neutral on this couple. I know it's not among the common ships like Ben and Rook or Gwen and Kevin, but I know it has its fair share of supporters, which is great. I do think this ship is adorable in concept, the idea of two powerful female leaders finding partnership in each other, but it's just not for me. And a lot of that boils down to personal taste and some of the tropes behind it. I'm always up for a good gay ship, but being gay doesn't automatically give points towards a ship for me. I've seen many ships that are either non-canon or canon that I feel like get an easy pass just for being LGBTQ showcases, and I personally don't feel the same way as most in that case. I need more meat to the bones, as it were. And unfortunately, I feel like the Atea and Luma ship for me is kind of held back by the fact it potentially plays into a trope I'm not one for, which is the idea that if a woman doesn't need a man, that automatically means she is a lesbian. Now, if this is something you're all for, I salute you, as tropes are not really a bad thing. It all boils down to how you write them, and I can understand why people could find comfort in these two as a couple. I definitely think there are things you can do with them, especially in the context of the Ben 10 world and their position of power, but as it is, I don't really feel strongly for this. And there are most certainly ways to play this ship out without the need of that trope, but even then it kind of feels too easy for me, if that makes sense. Honestly, it's really hard to put into words why this ship doesn't grab me, like others, but I do still see a lot of good elements in it that I can enjoy. I am for a rivalry between these two, since the Incursions and Tetramans are similar in a lot of ways, but also fairly different. Both are powerful pairs of empires that use a lot of force to build their way around the galaxy, but the Incursions use a lot more dirty tactics to get their way, while Tetramen are more likely to get up and personal with their means of fighting. So seeing Atea and Luma play off of each other would be fun to see, but I much prefer that not to be a ship, because it's nice to see two female characters being rivals to each other without it meaning that they're best friends or dating. It gives variety to characters without feeling boxed into what normally happens with these kind of dynamics. I think I'm more interested in seeing their dynamic be a play into the cultures of their species and how it affects each other than these two being some kind of pairing, whether that be platonic or not. But now we move on to Ben and Atea, and oh boy, this is a funny one to discuss. Now, this is a ship I would never want to see happen in canon, because the amount you would have to write to justify Ben being with Atea full time would have so many hoops to jump through that you would need multiple rings of Saturn to leap through just to even begin to make sense of it. But I can't deny the fun you could write for these two, whether that be making them an official couple or just a one-off thing where they sometimes flirt with each other. Most of what I see of this ship is funny to me, because most people that do write them together are fully aware that this would never work out and prefer the idea of Ben and Atea having a sort of Catwoman and Batman dynamic, but worse. And you know what? I'm kind of for it. The most I could ever see of this coming close to canon is Ben hooking up with her for a couple of days, just because Ben is curious and an idiot. We know from Bullfrag's perspective that he does find Aaya attractive, and I do feel like he could have fun blowing stuff up with Aaya, but it would never be a long-term thing. These two represent a more fun side of the villain and hero dating trope, and it works better in fanfiction since you can easily ignore all the red flags to try and explain them as a couple. You could write a story of them helping each other to be better people, more so Ben helping Aaya, but you could also write a villain story of Aaya making Ben worse, perhaps a version of an evil Ben in another timeline, because Ben being backed up by the Incursion Empire would be very scary to see, but kinda cool. But this pair works better in a lot of what-if scenarios or just one-off situations. There's nothing about this ship that would make me want to see it canon, but you can't deny the amazing ideas that can be made from it, and just the utter chaos these two would create. Though with that twisted idea of a couple out of the way, we now move on to a more messy pair that I have a lot to say on. Ben and Julie. I won't lie, I have a lot of biased thoughts here. My childhood self will never let me rank this lower, despite how trash this couple is in the end. Truly, I am just bitter. So why don't we unpack that? I grew up watching the UFA era of the series, especially early hybrid stuff, and I really liked early Ben and Julie when first watching the series. They bounced off of each other well, and it was nice to see Ben have someone outside of Gwen and Kevin to hang out with that wasn't directly related to alien stuff, minus ship. It gave a welcome space for Ben to have outside of all the crippling trauma and alien chaos he was going through at the time. I've personally been of the opinion that Ben's love interest does not need to be a frontline fighter like him, just someone that can keep up with his lifestyle enough to be by his side in ways that still matter. I feel like a lot of media I have seen doesn't know how to write a supportive partner that doesn't need to be kick-ass alongside the hero. That isn't to say Julie cannot fight. She has been shown willing to kill with her tennis racket and ship a few times. But at the end of the day, Julie is not a fighter on the same level as Gwen, Kevin, and Ben, and does a lot more down-to-earth stuff in her life. Julie, I feel, works best when she is the most reasonable member of the group, and a good quiet place for Ben to go to when things become too much. And on the other side, you can see Julie does enjoy Ben for who he is when the writers are not intentionally screwing with his character. She seems very open to the alien stuff as long as it doesn't push into her life and cause problems, being very quick to accept Ben and the Omnitrix for what they are. I like seeing relationships that can be built off of support, understanding, and even something as simple as lounging around together. Romance does not need to be big and flashy all the time, and I think a lot of stories forget that friendship is still an integral part to relationships, which is something Ben and Julie had, and was something they both needed. But then we all know what happened. Ben and Julie suffer from a problem a lot of series come to face, and that is how do you write a couple that has been together for a long amount of time? This is often why many series just go the easy route of the will they won't they relationships between characters, because there's a lot more easy things to write there without having to put in the effort, and still keep your audience engaged, using it like bait on a hook with a fish. However, when a pair officially becomes a couple, it does become tricky, because you have to both make it believable they're a couple, but still write it in a way to entertain the audience. At the start, it can be fine because you can explore early relationship problems, such as how they communicate or how they learn about each other, but over time, it can be very difficult to deal with the more a couple grows. And because Alien Force reached a point where it needed to roundhouse kick that reverse button on Ben's progress as a character, that in turn meant it was always going to affect him and Julie's relationship. Because it became very clear that the series didn't know what to do with her, resulting in arguments between Ben and Julie that were just painful to watch. Until eventually, they put this ship out of its misery, but in the worst way I have ever seen. It says a lot when even people who are not fans of this ship have talked about how bad this breakup was. And as someone who is a fan, it sucked to see. Though I also am kind of glad to finally see it be put to rest. But despite that all, I still really like this couple. Because of nostalgia and because I have the power to write my own stuff, they are a concept I really enjoy and will always be my number one relationship with Ben, because it just works for me. I like Julie being Ben's rock and Ben bringing fun into Julie's life. There is a great couple somewhere in the scraps we were left with, and I have been on the path to make that happen in my own stories. And I am sure we all have that one ship that makes us become raccoons in the trash, don't go denying it. This will always be my number one ship in Ben 10, and I am not afraid to admit it. Though, as we turn to the aftermath of this relationship, we find Julie and Hervé. And with everything I just said about Ben and Julie, you'd think I'd be annoyed by the lazy toss-in of Hervé to justify their breakup. But actually, I kinda like it. With all the crap that Julie and Ben have been through with the writing, I am happy with the knowledge that Julie could make it out with a nice partner, the opposite of what Ben ends up going through. Hervé is sweet and clearly cares for Julie and what's important in her life. Man was willing to throw hands with a Tetraman for this girl. That is dedication. Though I will admit, it is very funny that he has Ben's voice, but French. I suppose Julie couldn't escape the Tennyson vibe entirely. I do wish we could have seen a return of this pair, like maybe Ben and Julie catching up as friends, maybe a double date situation, but even if Julie never made a proper return, I can be happy with the fact that she ended up with someone good, and I presume living her life as the Queen of Tennis. But for something a little more unhinged to talk about, Charmcaster and Mike Morningstar. By now, I presume some of you have noticed that this is the only Charmcaster ship on the list, and that is because I want to briefly talk about something. Charmcaster is sadly in a confusing placement in the series because her age has never been stated in the show, though a few writers have gone on record saying she is supposed to be older than Ben and the crew, which makes sense since she looks to be in her teens during the original series. However, it is very clear that this was not something really strongly considered when writing her in episodes. Between Mike and Kevin, I highly doubt the writers intended for something insanely creepy to be written here, and more that they clearly made her age to be what the story needed it to be. Nothing concrete. Because of this, I did not include other ships of her, because I did not feel comfortable talking about that with the big elephant in the room here. It would just be too weird to think about. I only included Mike and her because it was semi-canon to the series, so I felt like I have something to stand on here. I hope that clears things up. Onto the actual relationship. This is an interesting one for me because it feels like their dynamic could go one of two ways based on what you wanted to do with them. You could go the canon route about their relationship being an example of toxic young love and how it affects people. Because the truth of the episode between these two is that it was less of a Mike and Charmcaster being a couple idea, and more of an exploration of Charmcaster as a character. She is lonely, a broken person who clearly witnessed a lot of horrific things growing up, leading to her becoming cold and cruel to others, such as her father's death at the hands of Adwacher. So throw in an episode about her being so desperate for love she ignores the red flags from the single pretty blonde she meets, and you get another thread into Charmcaster's descent into madness by the time of Omniverse. This episode also plays into Gwen and Charmcaster's relationship more than it does Mike and Charmcaster, I feel. So Mike, if anything, is more of a tool for Charmcaster than she is to him, at least through the lens of writing. Which has kind of been a whole thing with Mike. He was used as a means to push Gwen and Kevin's relationship, along with pushing those two as individual characters on their own occasions. So it makes sense why he would be the same thing with Charmcaster. Mike is the classic tale of being cautious with who you try to date, being a guy who preys on women he thinks is vulnerable to benefit him, and his story with Charmcaster is perfect for that. But on the other hand, you could also absolutely write these two as a full villain power couple, because let's be honest, we all kinda see it. Not to mention the fact that they're both people who clearly have been screwed over by the world of magic. I don't think a lot of people realise that Mike's powers appear to be something he was born with from what we know, and I feel like growing up with such a power would be kind of awful. It's a really messed up situation the more you think about it. Oh cool, you drain people's life forces. A one-way ticket to becoming a villain no matter what you do. Meanwhile, Charmcaster, well, I think we all know what happened to her, many times over. So you could write a story of these two coming together and being a genuine couple, while burning the world around them. Or even bettering themselves to finding someone who understands how shit life can be, especially with magic. Though I do feel like this version of them would never be a thing in canon, due to Mike's consistent character trait of being an awful person. And Charmcaster is stuck on the roller coaster that is her many character arcs, hence why this is a fanfiction side of them, something I am guilty of. There is a lot of potential for them to be a couple, but they also work as a cautionary tale of being careful who you fall in love with, and both are valid as writing ideas. Though speaking of cautionary tales, next up we've got Gwen and Mike. Not gonna lie, I don't think I have actually seen people ship these two, and it makes sense as to why. Mike is horrible, and Gwen is a good person, and we want the best for her, and we want the worst for Mike. Similar to what I said about Charmcaster, Mike is also a tool for Gwen's story, whether that be her relationship with Kevin or how Mike's magic is basically the opposite to Gwen's. They're both a good reflection of each other, and their time together serves as a good role in explaining to young girls to be careful who you try and date, no matter how charming a person may seem. But in terms of seeing these two as a couple, it's very hard to see. Charmcaster and Mike work in concept because they have that villain couple edge, two bad people that can bounce off of each other and make it interesting story because of that. Gwen and Mike, however, work the best when they are opposites. You could potentially write a version of them where Gwen helps Mike be a better person, and he learns to change with the courage Gwen gives him. But that's not something for me. Even if you don't write Mike as a long-term villain, I like these two having that opposite nature to bounce off of. They're better as a villain versus hero, or simply two magical rivals of sorts, even if you made them friends in a story. Plus, it also just kind of feels too easy and uninteresting to make them be a couple, perhaps due to Kevin being a thing, as we already have Gwen with an ex-villain that she helps build a better self out of. So Mike has no role to fill as it's taken by Kevin. Though regarding Mike and Kevin, they are also in the same tier. I think it's a little more interesting of an idea compared to Gwen and Mike, as while those two are complete opposites, Kevin and Mike are kind of supposed to be similar in a lot of ways. A lot of people like to see them as reflections of each other in the same manner as Ben and Albedo or Sunny and Gwen, except it's not just Kevin with a blonde palette swap. I could see a story where a reformed Kevin helps to reform Mike, having been in the same position as him, and I could equally see a version where Kevin stayed evil and he and Mike are villainous boyfriends. I'm sure there is something like that out there, but I'm not going to go looking for it. But similar to Gwen, their dynamic works when it's either a villain versus hero situation or a pair that reflects each other, one being a person who decided to change his ways and get a better life out of it, and another who refuses to change and thus is stuck in a cycle of power hunger. Yet another story where Mike is a tool used to push another character's story. Moving on from Mike's story purpose though, we have Sandra and Carl. I honestly love these two. They've got such a funny vibe for parents to a superhero, and they play off each other really well. It's believable they're a pair of people who have been married for a while now, and are just living life. It does make me wish we could get more episodes of them, especially since Carl apparently doesn't exist in Omniverse, cursed to forever be doing yard work, which is kinda sad because I feel like Omniverse would be a perfect time to have an episode about these two. I would even like to see a flashback episode on how they met, or maybe seeing the two trying to raise Ben when he was younger, as it lets us get to know more about Ben's background and how they influenced him as parents. But yeah, not much else to say here other than I like these two. Sadly, when it comes to the other Tennyson parents, Natalie and Frank, I do rank them lower, not because I don't like them as much, but because we have less to work with these two. You do get a decent amount of Natalie as a character, but Frank is just kinda there. Though with so much lacking on screen for these two, it does open the door for a lot of backstory to be made. How did they meet? What convinced Natalie to be with Frank, given how she kind of views his side of the family? What was it like for these two having to watch their daughter deal with both aliens and schoolwork? I want to know more. Similar to Sandra and Carl, I would love to see a backstory episode for this pair as well. Maybe a high school story where you get to see these two brothers meeting their future wives, perhaps retelling such tales to their own kids who want to ask advice for their own relationships. I know a lot of people don't really like Natalie, and I can understand why. I personally like the idea of her, and I think we just needed to see some more positive moments of her. And more of Frank, given how absent he was in the series. I'll take anything really, just let me see more of the other Tennyson members. Speaking of other Tennyson members, next up is Sunny and Antonio. I find it really funny that you think it would be the big, loud, and impulsive troll guy to be the bad influence, but no, the magic space girl is the more chaotic one out of the bunch. This pair only appeared in one episode, and while I know many people do not care much for Sunny, I can see some potential here. especially since Sunny apparently is from Verdona's side of the family only, not related to Max at all. But it seems like she's got Verdona's taste in not dating someone the same species as her, and I can't lie, I just kind of vibe with the concept of Sunny and Antonio. I think it's cute and chaotic. At times it does feel like Sunny is more using Antonio, especially since she seems pretty eager to flirt with Kevin, but I can see her and Antonio genuinely being in love. But also teenagers who love mayhem. Though I have to say, it was a very odd choice for Antonio to be the character picked to return to take Esther from Ben. I did not see that coming. It makes me wonder what happened between him and Sunny. My guess is maybe he stood up to her, feeling like he didn't want to go down a similar path to her, or maybe they got bored of each other, who knows. I wouldn't have minded seeing these two return for more chaos, maybe letting us get more insight onto Sunny as a person, and the culture behind Anodites. You could write a story for these two and how they're rebelling against their parents to live their lives, and they find support in each other. Or it's just a one-off crash and burn relationship, works either way. Now we round back to a more popular ship, Ben and Kevin. And honestly... yeah, not for me. Kevin and Ben is a relationship that I get more out of them being friends than being boyfriends. I like their brotherly bond that they build up over time, especially given how lonely these two seem to be. As kids, they found a friendship in each other, but it fell apart due to Kevin's unfortunate state in morals. But before that came about, they did actually seem to like each other's presence, and it's good to showcase male friendships in media, as I feel like half the time I have no idea what is going on with a lot of male friendships I witness in shows. These two go from friends, to enemies, to standoffish, to friends again, and even brothers over time. I like the progression between them, and it's not something I want to see a romance thrown into, as I personally feel like it just ruins it. That isn't to say I don't see why people ship them, and I can see the appeal. You've got your enemies to lovers trope, and you can have a compelling story about Ben helping Kevin and it becoming a romance. But I feel like Ben helping Kevin is something I can still get something out of without having to see them kiss in the end. Plus, Kevin and Gwen just work better with that anyway. Gwen and Kevin have a lot of differences that allow their relationship to be dynamic and interesting, with Gwen being smart, patient, and well-mannered, while Kevin is rough around the edges and knows people he really shouldn't owe money to. Kevin and Ben, on the other hand, just feel a little too similar to me to get anything out of, and honestly, I feel like them being in a romantic relationship would just end poorly. These two are really bad at communication, so I would hold no hope in them being a couple. They both need a partner that balances them, and sadly I think these two are both leaning on the same side of the scale. But I really like them as friends, and I'm glad to see how they've grown in that regard. A thumbs up for male friendships. Though, speaking of something I don't even know if it is a friendship at this point, Arjett and Kevin. I don't even know what is going on between these two anymore, because Arjett is such a little shit that I am surprised Kevin has not blocked his number and pretend he doesn't exist. I understand that these two grew up with each other and thus had to rely on one another during hard times, but I feel like we don't get enough of that to justify why he still trusts Arjett. Their dynamic is something I would want to see more of a friendship with than romance, especially since I want to see more as to why they are friends in the first place, because I think you can write a reason as to why Kevin still keeps Arjett in his life if you just gave Arjett more grace in some form and make him less of a prick. There is a sad friendship to be written here about two people who only had each other to fend off a cruel world as they grew up, bending the rules to get what they wanted and feeding off of each other's negative habits, only for one of them to change and the other one to struggle to be a part of that life. But we don't really get that, and I see no room for anything shipping related. Maybe you could write something about them being a thing in the past, a one-off relationship that probably came about due to a stupid bet that got out of hand, but that's really stretching it. Though the next one for Arjett is kind of funny to think about, and that is Gwen and Arjett. I include this because I have seen fan art, and it is always so funny to me because I can just hear Kevin crying in the background. Though other than that, it doesn't have much going for it. This is kinda like Gwen and Mike, but somehow worse. I can see no world where Gwen, of all people, would give Arjett a chance at anything, and would probably sooner throw him into a lake than go on a date with him. And even if you didn't have Gwen and Kevin dating, I feel like Kevin would still throw Arjett in that lake, because he would respect Gwen too much to let her be with someone like him. If you had to make something, maybe it could be Arjett teaching Gwen how to survive the street smarts way, and Gwen knowing how to keep Arjett in line. Or they have this sort of on and off situation where they both kind of want it, but neither are willing to give the other an inch to make it happen. We know that Gwen has a way to communicate with him, as she convinced him to help her out during the Tekadon situation. But if I were to see an episode of these two, I would much rather want to see it be an unwanted team up of them getting on each other's nerves, but ultimately gaining some kind of respect out of each other. Maybe a situation where they both have to rescue Kevin together. But as a romantic relationship, I can never see it. As funny as it would be to meme it, to torment Kevin, I don't have a strong enough will to do it just for the memes. Now for something I feel like I have seen out in the wild. Pierce and Ben. This is the kind of relationship I feel like if we got more of these two, I would be leaning into it being something I could be interested in. Given how Manny and Helen were supposed to be reflections of Kevin and Gwen in their debut episodes, it's easy to see that Pierce was supposed to be the same for Ben, as they are both leaders in training. I think it would have been cool to see these two interact more, both trying their best to keep their group safe and having to grow up fast in a sense, given how much they have to do alone as leaders. There's a bond between these two I can see happening, including a healthy rivalry that I feel like Ben should have had in this series. Yes, we do have people like Gwen or Albedo for Ben, but Pierce could have filled a spot in Ben's life that would expand his friend group. Gwen is family, so their bond is different to most, and Albedo is more supposed to be a dark reflection of Ben, or just completely insane, depends the episode you watch. So giving Ben a friend he could spar with, and another leader figure his age, you could get some interesting stories here. But despite all that, we really don't get much between these two, especially once Pierce becomes no more. So if these two had more of a friendship, I could have potentially seen a fun ship to be made out of it, but with the scraps canon gave us, it leaves me in a neutral position here. As for some of the other plumber kids, we have Helen and Manny. This is a simple ship, and yet it just works for me. These two were designed to be counterparts, made to balance each other in their strengths and weaknesses, right down to their power sets of physical strength and physical speed. A hot and cold couple, as most would put it. Honestly, as a kid, I legit thought these two were going to be a couple, probably because it would have been an easy pair to just have without needing to write much else about it. But then the plumber kids kind of just stopped being a thing, and then the Rooters arc happened. But we all know how that went. Given what happened to Pierce, I am surprised we didn't get to see a case of Helen properly grieving over her brother's death while Manny tried to keep the team together, as he naturally seemed to be the next in charge after all. But sadly, Manny and Helen suffered from the same problem as the rest of the plumber kids, in that they were dropped off on the side of the road and forgotten about, unless they were needed to make one of the main characters look cool. As much as I like these two as a couple in concept, I would rather we just have more time with this team and their relationship with each other. And with Ben's crew, they were a missed opportunity, which should be a tagline for Ben 10 at this point, and I can only hope that if we do get more Ben 10 in the future, and these folks somehow return, we can finally get more to their story. But I wouldn't say no to some shipping as well. Back to something I have a lot more to talk about. It's Tetrax and Max. Even as a kid when I watched this movie, these two just clicked in a way that I have not abandoned the ship since. They basically act like an old married couple in the movie, and you barely have to change much their dynamic if they were together. It doesn't help that these two are among the characters they call the 3 most wasted Ben 10 characters, so that's something they can bond over. But in all seriousness, I do miss these two. They really added something special to the Ben 10 lore, and it's always hype to see them, even if they got such minor roles as time went on. Some roles we don't talk about. I would have killed to have an episode about these two doing something together. It doesn't even have to be them dating. I just want some kind of scrap to feed off of, and I will be pleased. It really does surprise me that Omniverse did nothing with these two, beyond cameos of course. They seemed like prime subjects to add to the series, given how much Omniverse really liked callbacks to the original series. A bit too much if you asked me. Max and Tetrax just work in my eyes. Tetrax is a man bent on a path of change, wanting to mend the mistakes he made, but still retains a kind spirit that allows him to be sometimes playful. Counter that with Max, who is a coward, seemingly having a lot of potential and yet doesn't push herself enough from what we've seen. She made mistakes in her own past, and you could have done a story about her facing those mistakes like Tetrax, perhaps the two bonding over that about their lives. But they're also adults who have seen a lot in their lives, and sometimes it's nice to see a friendship, not even a ship, with older folks who aren't teenagers. People who, while not fully put together, are more mature than the main cast. I like seeing it, since these kind of relationships can happen at any point in your life. I really wanted more of these two, especially together on screen. They helped sell Secrets of the Omnitrix into my eye, and I hate seeing them go to waste. Maybe one day I can get my wish. And now, for our very first clear nope of the video, Ununice and Ben. Where do I even start with this mess? Now, I highly doubt that the writers intended for the weird implications between these two, especially with the Gwen genetics helping to make Ununice. The idea just seemed to be that Gwen was a sample of human genetics in general, not just her DNA, and basically used the most basic building blocks of human genetics to make Ununice, and not some clone of Gwen. But like, did it have to be Gwen? I have gone on record saying this entire episode would have been 10 times better if it was Kevin that touched the pod, because you could imagine the group's reaction at the end of the episode, especially Ben and Kevin's. But beside that point, even if they explained every inch as to why she is not a clone of Gwen, this would still be creepy. But again, I do not believe this was the writer's intention. And then Omniverse happened. I'm starting to think that, like, this is something I can say pretty often about Omniverse. For those who don't know, Ununice appeared in the Most Dangerous Game show, and there Omniverse decided that instead of her using Gwen for human blueprints, that she just shared a DNA with Gwen, sending her away with anyone else related to Ben. So you know. And even then, if we accepted the original idea of her not being a clone, or even the Kevin idea, there is still a massive issue with this relationship, and that is the existence of Julie. Because Ununice ends up serving to make Ben look like a worse boyfriend, who can't go 2 seconds without flirting with another girl in every episode. It was a similar issue towards Elena and Ben, but I'll get to them eventually. If I am being honest, which like so far this hour video has proven, I am not a big fan of the concept of Ununice in general, but if she has to exist, I would think it would be nice to see Ben have a friendship with her, because I feel like we don't really get that with him in terms of having a friendship with a female character, given how much Ben cares about the Omnitrix and in said debut episode of Ununice even preaches the importance of her and his aliens. This episode could have made a good case for who Ben is as a person and his relationship towards his aliens, and less his creepy relationship with Ununice. I am glad that whatever was going on between them was dropped pretty quickly, though I think Omniverse did go a little too far in their own directions, even if it was a blink and you'll miss it cameo. Though I will say it is really funny that this is the closest we would ever get to something like a Ben dating an Omnitrix kind of crack ship in the series. And it's not the worst thing about these two being together. But speaking of Omnitrix crack ships, Vilgax and the Omnitrix. I'm gonna be honest, this is a massive joke, and yet somehow the longest will they won't they running relationship in this show. Putting the jokes to the side for a second, I am surprised we never got an alternate universe of Vilgax with the Omnitrix, given how easy that would have been to bring him back as a threat and explain how he can keep up with Ben by the time of Omniverse. But back to the memeing, he doesn't deserve the watch, simple as that. Now let's get back to something actually canon, or at least was in some form. Azimouth and Zenith. Azimouth having an ex-girlfriend is not something I would have had on my bingo card, but at the same time, I don't have a hard time believing in it. Man had a life before the Omnitrix, and I liked that we got to see parts of it. I am in the camp that Zenith was not the sole reason behind the watch, just one of many catalysts that led Azimouth down this path. Not to mention it feels like a parallel of Azimouth and Ben when it comes to how they handle their love lives. But the real question here is, would I have wanted Zenith to return? The series itself made it seem like maybe we'd get more insight on her and what she was doing nowadays, but then she never comes back, nor is really brought up. Another piece of lore left out in the rain. I personally would be interested in seeing her return, so we can understand her perspective on the whole thing, and how she would feel about the Omnitrix, along with how much Azimouth has changed. But them getting back together I wouldn't see happening. Sometimes relationships don't work out, even if you mend things over time, and I could see these two just being a reflection of that subject matter. But I also would be interested in seeing a what-if story with them, or perhaps tales of their younger years. Learn more about who these two once were, and what their dreams and hopes were, how they affected each other before parting ways to make their own paths, especially since we have no clue what Zenith is up to. Has she been on Galvan Prime this whole time and never returned Azimouth's calls? Or is she leading her own crew across the galaxy as she does her own research? We may never know. And now for the crossover pairings, we've got Ben and Rex. And I'm going to be honest here. I am very well aware that this is a decently popular ship. I have seen enough fan art to know about that. And while I can understand the appeal, I also don't care much about it. I think the main issue there is that they're too much of the same thing, which isn't a ship I like for the both of them. Now, granted, Ben and Rex are not the same person. They both live very different worlds and thus exhibit traits based on their environments. Ben is a lot more carefree and emotionally open compared to Rex, while Rex was built as a child soldier in constant war in his world. And while he is out there like Ben, Rex is often more closed off or distrusting of others quickly, something you can see when these two interact. But that isn't enough to make them different enough to make me feel like I could care about them being in a relationship. It's kind of similar to the Kevin and Ben problem for me, in that I get more out of them being friends than being in a relationship, and because of their similarities, it doesn't push these characters in a direction I think they should go. Ben and Rex, I feel, need a partner who is different enough to them, both because too much of the same theme would be overwhelming with their kind of personalities, and because it challenges them as characters and their stories, or provides a different dynamic they don't already have with someone else. This also plays into what I said earlier about them needing male friendships that feel like friendships, and I enjoy how their dynamic grows in the crossover. Beyond what happened in the reboot and in one issue of the comics, I am surprised we didn't get another crossover of these two in the main continuity. Omniverse seems like the prime zone for that, even if it were a one-off episode. But maybe I am just too hopeful for more Rex. But shifting into the other crossover ship, Zach and Ben. I won't lie, I like this better than Rex and Ben. Ugh, I can already hear the flame wars. Now, Zach and Ben are fairly similar as well, but as someone who has actually watched The Secret Saturdays, Zach feels different enough to me that I find more interest in this as a ship. Zach is a lot more gentle than Ben ever is, and while Zach is a gremlin of the wild, he holds a lot more empathy that we don't see a lot of male characters having back in this era of cartoons. He's smart, wise, and dealt with a lot of internal issues that you don't really ever see Ben do, or at least beyond a couple of moments in the series. Because of that, I feel like Zach and Ben would be a good balance for each other. Zach able to be a softer presence in Ben's life, perhaps even relating to Ben's views of his aliens being valid to him. But Zach also is able to keep up in Ben's life and still have a life outside of the relationship. Despite the problems I may have with the crossover, I do think they at least managed to make Ben and Zach feel like different people, and I enjoyed the little moments that showcased this. Their relationship is nothing I want to see in canon, but I can understand the appeal behind it. Definitely see potential in it. And hey, maybe it could be a good excuse to bring back the Saturdays, but I suppose I can only be so hopeful. Now we have Zylene and Mr. Bowman, and you know what? Good for him. I have never been a fan of the Mr. Bowman running gag, since it often just ends up feeling cruel than it is funny. This joke just does not land well because you really feel sad for this man who is just trying to live his life and run a business. It also plays into a running joke about Ben that I do not like either, which is him always screwing things up even when not intending to, making him look like a worse of a person than he should be. So when I saw that Mr. Bowman got himself a pretty fish wife, I was really happy for him. He deserves it. I especially like how you can see how dedicated these two are towards each other, and the effort they put in to be together despite all the struggles. It's a good showcase of displaying obstacles in a pair that are already together and convincing us that they are something together. I am sad that we didn't get a wedding episode, but at the same time, I'm kinda glad, as I just know it would be an excuse to make Ben become a destructive trouble magnet again. I can at least rest easy knowing this man has someone he can go to, and I am willing to just accept it as it is. And then we have another background couple, Subdora and Exoskull. Not gonna lie, I remember these two way better than I remember Maltruant, and that's kinda sad. I did not care much for the final arc of the series because it was nonsensical and not in the fun way, but I did enjoy aspects of these two popping up on screen. Minus Subdora's entire design. I just think these two are really funny. I like their soap opera of a relationship because you can tell that this is just how they roll, and you know what? Good for them. It's not like any other relationship we have in Ben 10, so it stands out, and was something I needed in order to stay awake during that final arc. Also, I am a sucker for just drastically different species hooking up, because I both like the world building aspects of it, and because it's just really funny to see what odd pairings you can make. I like to do it a lot in my own stuff. Not much else to say on these two, but I at least had fun watching them be dramatic, as I tuned out Malturant during his story. Right! Now we get into stage 2 of Ben's love life, Esther and Ben. Given the entire hellfire that ended up being Ben and Julie's relationship, I was interested in seeing where Ben's love life would go as they gave him a fresh start. I have stated elsewhere a few times that Omniverse was around the point that I fell off on this series, but I was aware of Esther by the time I left. So you could imagine my surprise when I came back to not only see Kai returned, but also learn that Esther only had 5 episodes in total. I was convinced she would be more important. Not to mention the fact that all but one of those episodes was about other ships in Ben's love life. Rules of Engagement was about Ben settling things with Julie. Catfight was about the drama that was Ataya and Luma in Ben's life. Fight at the Museum was about Ben and Kai. And then you had the Cluster that was the most dangerous game show. So only Esther's debut episode actually focused on these two without outside ships. And even then... Esther, my girl, I am so sorry for all of this. But maybe I should talk about this ship, instead of tiptoeing around it like the show did. Ben and Esther I quite like, mostly through concept though. Esther I personally feel like matches Ben's energy the most, as both have been shown to be energetic, but brave and kind people, as we saw Esther trying to help her people, but stepping up when knowing something was wrong. There is a lot to her character I wanted to know more of, such as if she really wanted to be the leader of her people, how does she actually view Ben, and what is her life outside of those two things? We know she hangs around with Undertown kids and has a fun side to her, so there is a few storyline options to write about her. Similar to the Julie and Hervé situation, I was happy to see Ben find what I thought was a good partner for him, and had potential to not bore the writers enough to not know what to do with her, but sadly the relationship barely got that far, and was a red herring for the actual endgame ship, which I don't feel is fair. Esther was either written in mind of Kai being the endgame, so why are we wasting our time here? Or she was made and just used for some reason, so either option isn't a great treatment of the character. It really feels like she was solely made to fill the void in Ben's life until they figured out what they wanted to do with her. These two don't even get the bonus of just being friends on screen for that long, so you don't get anything of this relationship if you take what canon gives us. But she is a character that has just hit the hearts of many in this fandom, and for those that don't like what happened to Ben and Julie, or the drama that is Ben Kai, it's understandable why people gravitated to this relationship. And perhaps that is because of the lack of screen time with it, as it allows people to fill in the gaps with what they want for Ben and his love interest, and expand Esther in her own way. If I were not such a huge Benly fan, this would probably be the ship I end up going with Ben, because it's cute and has a lot you can do with it. Plus, it is interesting to see Ben in a relationship with an alien, even if she is half human. For someone who turned into a lot of aliens, I am surprised we didn't explore a side of Ben in terms of romancing aliens, which, yes, sounds like a Mass Effect joke in the making, but it is a genuine thought. It'd be similar to Max and his love life, and explore more of how humans interact with the outside world. Heck, I feel like you could get a lot out of Ben and Esther if you made Esther a full Kraho, and have Ben explore the culture of her people because of how much it matters to her. But instead, we have them breaking up for the most convoluted of reasons, and Esther dries off with Antonio of all people. As fun as Esther and Ben are, they really suffer from seeing the behind the scenes and watching the writers fumble something that shouldn't have happened to begin with. But like many others, I can still enjoy the ship for what it has to offer, and the many AUs and fan art out there. And round number 3, we've got Ben and Kai. I have a lot to say here, but I think I should start off by clarifying that I do not hate Kai. If anything, I'm kinda just neutral towards her. And Ben is a complicated piece of mess, even if he is my favourite character. No, what I do not like here is the relationship, and I want to break down the why that is. The biggest thing about this ship that does not work is that it is stockpiled with many negative tropes and traits that just fail to make it work. For starters, there is no actual development within this ship. You get the present timeline of where you question whether these two actually like each other and why, and their future selves who are suddenly married, and you're told to accept that. That is not good writing, because you can't skip out on the crucial details that are supposed to make this believable. Now, I am aware that Omniverse was supposed to have another season, what with the galactic road trip concept, and I have no doubt Kai was supposed to appear there. However, I don't feel like that would have fixed it, because I am not convinced the story would have changed them, at least not enough to make it count. Ben and Kai suffer from many issues a lot of endgame couples suffer from, ranging from lack of chemistry to how this relationship actively presents the characters worse than they should be. There have been many times where I actively like a pair of characters more when they're not sharing screen time together, and that's not a good thing. Ben has already been facing a lot of issues up to this point in Omniverse due to inconsistencies and mishandlings of his negative traits. And let me make this clear. Ben having bad personality quirks is perfectly fine. It's a matter of the writing and how it presents him. Kai, meanwhile, had the issue of just not being a character for 90% of the series, showing up late to Omniverse without a proper update on who she is. I can understand that it would have been hard to write her, as we haven't seen her in universe for 6 years, and a person can change a lot over such a course of time. But you also don't want to change them too much until they're unrecognizable. And because Kai had very little going for her, it meant that Omniverse kind of just latched onto her existing traits, and amping them up to a crazy amount. So starting off, these two were already in a bad place before this new ship of them ever formed. Not to mention, it kind of felt like Kai was only brought back for the sake of Kenny, and to prove a point regarding the original Ben 10K timeline, due to how Omniverse perceives the original series. So I feel bad for Kai, because it never feels like she is meant to be there other than to remind you that she is from the original series, and not to be new and exciting. And then you have the topic of the red strings of fate. For those who don't know what this is, it's a common trope where two people are destined to be together, because fate, also known as the writers, told them so. This trope isn't bad, but it is overplayed and used in an excuse, which is what Ben 10 did. Instead of trying to convince you that these two belong together, you're simply told that is the case, and thus very little effort is put in to justify it. It can take you out of the story because instead of being allowed to form your own thoughts and opinions, you can feel the writers themselves are whispering in your ear, telling you how to feel about what is happening on screen. Not to mention that these red strings tangled up other characters in the mix, such as Esther being a red herring and Kenny being glued to their subplot about his parents, only existing to tell people that they have to be a thing. I have seen a lot of stories that try to tell you one thing, but the visuals you watch tell you a different story. That includes things like friendship, family dynamics, and romances. And it's not a good writing habit to have. The idea that actions speak louder than words. Now, do I think this relationship is hopeless? No. In fact, I feel like the hate for it can be over-exaggerated. Don't get me wrong, I have gone on my own rants about it, but there is a reason. But there is a reason why many fans do not like this ship, and it's more than just about who Ben ends up with, and more about the statements this story ends up telling us, and how little they care for these two, which is not fair for either of them. Because I have seen rewrites and fan art that does make me like this pair in a different light, and I myself have tackled the idea of them here and there. But ironically, what makes this ship just not work isn't even about them being a ship, and more of an example of what not to do when writing characters. But for those who do like this ship, good on you. I am glad there are people who can find enjoyment in it, and none of this is an attack on anyone out there. Because I do like aspects about Kai, and do wish this relationship could have been different. Though speaking more of Kai, we've got Esther and Kai. This will never not be funny to me, because when I finally sat down and watched Fight at Museum, I found that this episode that tried to convince me Ben and Kai were in-game actually ended up convincing me that Kai and Esther worked better as a couple. What with Esther respecting Kai and even comforting her in the end. It's in a similar vein to Rook and Ben in that this is clearly not the writer's intention, but it happened anyway. I really do like these two together, because I think they can play off of each other well. Esther is playful and kind-hearted, while Kai is headstrong and brave. Plus there's the fact that these two really like the idea of adventure and outside alien cultures. Though I will be honest, in that a lot of this ship is just built off of the fact of how funny it would be. And many people I have talked to about it have compared the relationship between Mako, Kuro, and Asami, which I know very little about, so I will take their word for it. But I still enjoy the idea of this relationship, and could see it work in canon. I also 100% believe that Ben would absolutely support these two. But now onto something that sounds funny, but I know the true horrors of: Ben and the Omnitrix. Now I know what you're thinking. This is just like Vilgax and the Omnitrix joke. And it kind of is, but also not. Because I have sadly burned my innocence by accidentally stumbling onto this in the wild, and I have never been the same since. Hence why I'm putting it down here. Quickly moving on from that painful memory, we have Ben and Elena. Now, this ship is interesting because I feel like it's arguably one of Ben's most tragic of relationships, both in canon and in the realm of shipping. These two were childhood friends, and now one of them has gone insane due to alien nanochips that have corrupted the person that she is. And if this isn't some angst-filled fanfiction in the making, then I don't know what is. It does surprise me not to see a lot about these two online, because they have a lot of tropes that I feel a lot of people would have latched onto. And while this is something I don't think would ever be in-game and canon, there is an air of mystery to be had in AUs and fan art that does intrigue me. Whether that be stories of them never getting to be a thing because Elena refuses to change, or maybe can't even anymore, or a tale of Ben reaching out to her and helping her, eventually allowing her to return to the person she once was, even with the scars she still has. Either way, you get a lot of sadness between these two. Though I mentioned earlier a certain flaw in this ship that not a lot of people talk about, and that's the existence of Julie. I don't know why she was never mentioned in Alien Swarm. Originally, I presumed that maybe it was because Alien Swarm, like Race Against Time, existed in its own reality, which it still kinda does, but then they made parts of it canon in the show, and now you're really questioning Ben's commitment to his girlfriend? So when watching this movie, you kinda have to ignore the fact that Julie just doesn't exist for some reason? I don't know, maybe Celestial Sneapian sneezed or something. But if we do bring Julie back, then we've got Elena and Julie as a ship. Honestly, I feel like this can be in a similar vein to Ben and Elena, and that there is a lot of tragedy to be written here. Perhaps a tale where Elena thinks she likes Ben, only to find someone else that she still can't be with. These two didn't interact a lot in canon, since a lot of it was mostly directed towards Ben, but it is interesting that Julie is the one to talk down Elena both times. It makes you wonder if Elena respects Julie in any way, or even has a proper thought about the other girl beyond just her being Ben's boyfriend. I meant to write girlfriend. Oh no. Even if you don't ship these two, there is something to be had here about their interactions that I kind of want to see more of. Perhaps in a friendship manner, or simply just a good person trying to help someone so broken. Because someone like Ben is too close to the case with Elena, so maybe an outside person could be the one to help her. And now we have Julie and Gwen. This is a very simple but sweet ship, I feel, because despite all the shenanigans that happened between Julie and Ben, I am glad to see her and Gwen still had a friendship throughout the series. It's nice to see friend groups and shows interacting with one another than just the same two separate pairs always talking to one another while two members barely speak a word to each other. It is kinda sad that a point is reached where Gwen treats Julie far better than Ben, and if Kevin wasn't in the picture, I would have half expected Gwen to swoop in and take Ben's girlfriend, which is kind of a funny mental image. There's not a lot to say about these two, but I get the appeal. Though at the same time, I do prefer their friendship, and I do wish we could have seen them keeping up that that friendship in Omniverse, instead of Thanos snapping Julie out of the show. Because I feel like this series forgets that Julie also knew Kevin and Gwen, and wasn't just Ben's girlfriend. And then, elsewhere in the Tennyson family tree, we've got Camille and Joel. Despite having one episode, I was indeed sold on this ship. I liked that it expanded on other members of the Tennysons and their relationship towards aliens and the plumbers, and you can tell Camille and Joel do love each other. It is a shame they never got to return, especially since Lucy was brought back in Omniverse. It would have been nice to catch up on the happy couple and see what they were up to. Maybe see how Camille adapted to living on Earth and getting to know the other Tennyson members. Up next is Cooper and Gwen, which I won't lie, I kind of forgot it existed. There isn't anything really to say about this ship beyond reminding people how pretty Gwen is, and that Cooper is a character. I do think between the two, it hurts Cooper more than it hurts Gwen, because he does not get a lot of screen time. So spending time on his crush and not exploring it just provides nothing for him. That isn't to say a character can't have a side crush on another character in a story and not work. You don't even have to put too much focus on it and just have it be a quirk to this person, because that happens. My issue is that it has enough focus on it that fills up too much space in the story and achieves nothing. Not to mention how many times they keep pulling this with Gwen for no reason. You could have done a story about Cooper overcoming his crush and being more of a friend towards Gwen, since these two could bond over their intelligence and give them friends outside of their respective groups. But then there is Kevin and Cooper, which I feel less negative about. Don't get me wrong, I am just incredibly neutral towards these two, but I feel there is just enough there to make something more interesting, though a lot of that stems from headcanons I've seen around. There are a lot of people, including myself, that like to headcanon that the reason Cooper looks like Kevin over time is less of his crush on Gwen and more that he genuinely looks up to Kevin and thinks he is really cool and thus was inspired by him. And honestly, the idea of Cooper shifting his crush from Gwen to Kevin of all people would be really funny to see, or maybe both, by icon, and I would be interested in seeing how Kevin would react to such a thing. But other than that idea, I'm very on the ship to me, but it would add to Cooper as a person, including making a proper friendship between him and Kevin. And now for some more tragedies, we've got Emily and Ben up on stage. I really do not like the fact that this pair made people headcanon the fact that Ben put a girl in a wheelchair, something I have never been comfortable with. Especially since many see it as less of an accident and more something malicious for Ben, which is crazy to think about. I also get nothing from this, so it feels like a pointless add-on to a story, not to mention the fact that I was kind of annoyed by this one friend of Gwen she seemingly had outside of her friend group actually knew Ben and dated him at one point. For an episode about Gwen, Ben still had a habit of hovering around a little too closely to her life. I like seeing characters having their own lives outside of the main story, because it can help them make them feel alive and be their own people. There is also the added element that I'm just not a big fan of Emily, but I don't want to be mean since this was her only episode in the series. And now we have Jennifer Nocturne and Captain Nemesis. Need I say more? But in all seriousness, this is something I do not see as a ship, and never will, but I do see this as an interesting writing point. It is fascinating to me whenever Ben 10 gets to pull off some darker episodes, because it brings in a lot of room for discussion, which is what this episode was. Bringing Jennifer back and making her such a broken character is something that resonated with a lot of people, and has made Captain Nemesis a much more realistic horror of the world, similar to how Mike is in a way. I bring this pair up because I wanted to briefly talk about the fact that a couple in a series isn't necessarily a ship. Sometimes it can be an example of real-world dynamics and situations that people in real life have gone through, and it's good to talk about them in respectful ways. Just as it's important to have good relationships outside of romances and media, like friendships or family dynamics, it's also good to talk about the negative ones too. The idea that love isn't always a good thing, and that it's not an excuse for what horrible people do, how love can even put an individual in harm's way. It's something we should acknowledge more, and I feel like it's very easy to ignore all this kind of stuff in favor of shipping, or trying to make everything seem black and white. It's also good to be aware that sometimes when people like two characters interacting, it doesn't mean they approve of the context of the relationship, but instead find something that interests them regarding the dynamic between these two people. There is a lot more to writing than wholesome positives, and I'm always up to seeing it and breaking it down. So now we have Rook and Rayona. Honestly, the concept of Rook already having a partner before meeting Ben is something I really like, and it just makes sense. Look at this man and tell me if it surprises you that he's already dating someone. As much as I love drama and crazy storylines, I also have to appreciate the idea of just a normal couple here and there, because not every relationship needs to climb mountains to prove itself to me. I even like how Rook has moments with other female characters and feels comfortable enough to reject them or admit attraction without needing to cheat on his girlfriend. Because while we don't get these two on screen a lot, you can at least see the influence it has on Rook through dialogue and actions. But I do wish we got to see more of them and learn who Rayona is as a person. There is a lot of potential here, and it would have benefited Rook, who needed more personal stories not directly related to Ben. Though speaking of Ben being involved in Rook's life, we have Ben and Shah. This is only here because I think it's funny. The idea of Ben being with Rook's sister is just the kind of thing I could see Ben doing, and I love the smug expression I can already see on his face. But beside the memes again, I could also see this being an interesting relationship. You could write a story about Ben helping Shah when it comes to joining the plumbers, giving her pointers, or even the pair working on a mission together, with him backing up her dreams every step of the way, or Shah enjoying her time with Ben and appreciating him for who he is. Not something I would ever see happening in canon, but it's fun nonetheless. Even a friendship between these two seems pretty possible, given Ben seems to have an easier time getting to know Rook's siblings than his parents. We are nearly at the end, so let's move on to Gwen and Edwin. Now, this ship exists on the list because it was based on a thought I had. I mentioned before that we're so used to the idea of Gwen and Kevin that I think we forgot what it must have been like in the early days of this series when it came to shipping. I remember talking to a friend about the topic and wondered what could have been if the series continued in a similar vein as the original series. And my bet was that Edwin of all characters would have been a prime character return and have more interactions with the gang, which brought up some interesting what-if stories in my head. Gwen and Edwin, I can see it being a thing based on the original series. Both of them have a bright but perhaps complicated future ahead of them, and I could see them bonding over aspects of their lives and intelligence. Not to mention the fact that Edwin apparently helped building Omnitrix City, so him coming back in the series would have worked. Even if he returned in UAF era of the series, I could still see him and Gwen have a friendship, perhaps even feelings depending on how much Edwin has changed as a person since then. I think this relationship is fascinating to me because of the what-ifs of the fandom itself if things didn't progress from the original series, compared to what we're used to now. Which brings me to Edwin and Ben. I'm more neutral on the idea of them because I feel like they have the issue of being too similar in a lot of ways, but that might have been different based on if Edwin had returned and what he could have been like. We know Ben and him kept in contact because of Omnitrix City, so I would have liked to have seen Edwin have a cameo in the Ben 10K stuff, maybe even see if the two were still friends or something. Maybe he could have made his own comments on the state of Ben 10K, given his own history dealing with family members that put their work ahead of their loved ones. Either way, Edwin being a character from the original series opens up a lot of discussion I don't see talked about a lot, so I thought it'd be fun to offer my own thoughts here and see what other people think. All in all, the nature of shipping and writing is complicated because even the best of the best or the worst of the worst have many points to tackle and talk about, including how it can just boil down to preference. Telling stories about romance is hard, and it's very easy to fumble, but it can also be fascinating to watch how two people can become close and be something else entirely, and how that affects them, other characters, and the story itself. Even with the bad, people can learn a lot from it as writers and build their own ideas or discussions with people, and it's always a joy to see, as long as we're all respectful about it. So I hope some of you will let me know your thoughts down below, along with other points about relationships and story writing you may want to talk about. A fandom can't exist from one person alone. As we're all different people, we all have our own thoughts and taste when it comes to this kind of stuff. Sometimes a person likes something simple, and another will binge Archive of Our Owns until 5 in the morning about a single pair that has ruined their lives. We each feel something about this topic, and I wanted to bring attention to it in a way that I hope won't cause a flame war, so fingers crossed. But thank you all for watching, leave your comments down below, because I want you all to know that Kevin and his car are the #1 ship in this franchise.